The shredded silk. They say you can tell how much someone hates you by the effort they put into destroying the things you love. I didn't want to believe that at first. I wanted to think that family meant something, that blood or marriage tied us together in a way that required basic human respect. But standing in the doorway of my guest bedroom, staring at the ruined pile of emerald green silk scattered across the hardwood floor, I realized a cold, hard truth. Envy doesn't care about family. Envy only cares about total destruction. The dress had been tailored specifically for me. It was meant to celebrate my 5th wedding anniversary with Julian, 5 years of building a life, overcoming debt, working endless late nights, and finally reaching a point where we could take a breath and celebrate our love. I had saved for 3 months to buy that silk fabric. I spent weeks working with a local dressmaker who hand-stitched every seam. It was delicate, beautiful, and made me feel like the confident woman I had fought so hard to become. And now, it was in ribbon-like shreds on the floor. The cuts were clean, deliberate, and precise. Someone hadn't just spilled wine on it. Someone had taken a pair of fabric shears and sliced down the front bodice, through the flowing skirt, and across the hand-embroidered waistline. My hands trembled as I knelt down, my fingers touching the frayed edges of the silk. Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I forced myself not to let them fall. Instead, a cold, heavy lump formed in my chest. There were only 3 people in the house that afternoon. My husband Julian, his mother Evelyn, and his sister, Brenda. Julian was out in the garage washing his car. Evelyn was taking a nap downstairs in the sunroom. And Brenda was standing in the hallway right behind me, leaning against the doorframe with a cup of iced tea in her hand. "Oh, sweetie," Brenda's voice cut through the heavy silence of the room. It was soft, dripping with fake sympathy, but her eyes were bright with a chilling satisfaction. "Look at that mess. Did you drop something sharp on it? Or maybe that cheap material just ripped apart? I always told Julian you shouldn't waste money on fancy things when you don't have the figure to pull them off." I turned slowly to face her. Brenda was 32, 2 years older than me, and had spent the last 5 years making sure I knew I was an outsider in her family. When Julian and I first started dating, Brenda treated me like a temporary distraction. When we got engaged, her coldness turned into passive-aggressive comments. But when Julian started climbing the ladder at his firm and bought our home, Brenda's subtle insults turned into open hostility. "This didn't rip on its own, Brenda," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though every word carried the weight of a stone. "This was cut, with shears." Brenda took a slow sip of her tea, shrugging her shoulders casually. "Well, don't look at me like that, Maya. Why would I touch your dress? Maybe you did it yourself for attention. You always loved playing the victim whenever Julian doesn't give you full control of his paycheck." That was Brenda's favorite weapon. Accuse me of being a gold digger, despite the fact that I worked 40 hours a week as an architectural designer and paid half of our mortgage. Before I could reply, I saw a tiny glint of silver sticking out from Brenda's oversized handbag, which was resting on the hallway console table just behind her. I stood up, walked past her, and looked down. Right there, tucked inside the side pocket of her purse, were my grandmother's vintage sewing shears, the ones I kept in the top drawer of the sewing kit in that very room. The blades were still smeared with faint traces of dark green thread. She didn't even care to hide it. She wanted me to know it was her. She wanted me to feel powerless. "You took my shears," I said, pointing directly at her bag. "You walked into this room, opened my closet, and sliced my dress into pieces." Brenda's smile vanished for a split second, replaced by a flash of annoyance that I had called her bluff so quickly. But she recovered fast, crossing her arms over her chest. "And who is Julian going to believe, Maya? You, or his own sister, who has been looking out for him his entire life? Go ahead, run to him, see what happens." She turned around and strolled down the hallway, her laugh echoing against the walls. Standing there in the quiet house, staring at my ruined dress and listening to Brenda's footsteps fade away, something inside me changed. The hurt and sorrow vanished, replaced by an icy, unwavering clarity. Brenda thought she had won. She thought she could continuously step on me, ruin my moments, and hide behind the shield of being family. She thought I would cry, complain to Julian, start a shouting match, and look like the crazy, unstable sister-in-law. She was wrong. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to give Brenda exactly what she deserved, and it was going to cost her everything she valued most. Shadows of the past. To understand why Brenda hated me so deeply, you have to understand the dynamic of the Vance family. When I first met Julian in our mid-20s, he was a gentle, hard-working guy who constantly felt like he owed his family the world. His father had passed away when Julian was in high school, leaving his mother, Evelyn, and Brenda behind. Brenda, being the older sister, stepped into a position of authority, but instead of using that authority to support her family, she used it to control them. Evelyn spoiled Brenda endlessly. Whatever Brenda wanted, Brenda received. If Brenda needed money for a new luxury handbag, Evelyn would scold Julian for not giving his sister an allowance from his part-time college job. If Brenda failed a class or lost a job, it was always someone else's fault, never hers. Then came me. When Julian brought me home for dinner for the first time, I brought a homemade tart and flowers for Evelyn. Evelyn was polite, but Brenda sat at the dining table with her arms crossed, evaluating my shoes, my handbag, and my demeanor. "So, Maya," Brenda had said during that very first dinner, sliding her fork around her plate with obvious boredom. "Julian tells us you work in drafting. Isn't that mostly a man's job? Or do you just draw the lines for the real architects?" Julian had tried to jump in to defend me, but I answered calmly. "I design the structures, Brenda. I oversee the projects from concept to completion." Brenda just snickered into her napkin. "Right. Well, just don't expect Julian to support your little artistic hobbies forever. Our family values security, not pipe dreams." Over the next 5 years, those small stabs became a daily pattern. When Julian and I announced our engagement, Brenda announced her own major promotion at her PR firm at the exact same dinner party, a promotion that turned out to be fake. When we bought our house, Brenda told all of our mutual relatives that Julian had put down 100% of the down payment, conveniently omitting the fact that I had saved half of it from my own hard-earned income. Why did she do it? Because in Brenda's eyes, Julian's success belonged to her and Evelyn. I was an intruder stealing resources that were rightfully hers. And for years, I swallowed my pride. I kept the peace. Every time Brenda made a snide remark about my clothes, my career, or my cooking, I smiled and let it slide. Every time Julian asked me to be the bigger person for the sake of his mother, I nodded and swallowed my frustration. "She's just stressed, Maya," Julian would tell me at night, rubbing his face in exhaustion. "You know how hard things were for her after Dad died. Please, just don't push back. It makes everything easier." Be the bigger person. How many times have women heard that phrase used to justify their abuse? How many times are we asked to absorb someone else's toxic behavior just to keep the water calm? I spent 5 years being the bigger person. I let her ruin my baby shower plans by throwing a last-minute party on the exact same afternoon. I let her criticize my taste, my family, and my dignity. But destroying my anniversary dress was different. It wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a physical manifestation of my hard work, my love for Julian, and a milestone we had reached together. Slicing that dress was Brenda's way of saying, "You don't get to be happy in this house. You don't get to celebrate." As I stood in the guest bedroom after Brenda walked away, hearing the faint sound of Julian laughing at something his mother said downstairs, I realized something vital. Being the bigger person hadn't brought me peace. It had only given Brenda permission to push me further. By staying quiet, I wasn't keeping the peace, I was enabling my own humiliation. I looked down at the shredded green silk one last time. I took a deep breath, picked up the sewing shears from Brenda's bag, wiped the threads off the blades, and placed them back in my drawer. Then I walked into my bedroom, pulled out my laptop, and opened a blank document. I was no longer going to ask Julian to fight my battles. I was no longer going to plead for Brenda's respect. I was going to use Brenda's own weapon against her, her absolute, unyielding obsession with her public reputation. Brenda worked as a senior coordinator at a high-profile public relations firm in the city. Her entire life revolved around appearances. Her Instagram was carefully curated with photos of fine dining, luxury clothes, and stories about her charitable heart. She was preparing for a major promotion next month, a VP role that would make her the face of the firm's main division. She lived for status. She breathed for admiration. If I confronted her publicly now, without proof, Julian would plead for peace, Evelyn would cry, and Brenda would act like a victim. She would twist the narrative and make me look jealous and petty. No, a direct attack would fail. I needed a plan. I needed to build a net so tight that when Brenda finally stepped into it, she wouldn't be able to blame anyone but herself. My anniversary dinner was in 3 days. I wasn't going to cancel it. In fact, I was going to make sure Brenda was there, front and center. The unraveling thread. The morning after the dress incident, I woke up early, long before Julian. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, where I found Brenda sitting at the island, sipping coffee in her silk bathrobe. She looked up at me with a triumphant, mocking smirk, waiting for me to break down, yell, or accuse her. Instead, I smiled at her warmly. "Good morning, Brenda," I said softly, setting down a fresh pot of coffee. "Did you sleep well?" Her smirk flickered for a second, replaced by confusion. She searched my face for any trace of anger or tears, but I kept my expression perfectly serene. "I slept fine," she said carefully, narrowing her eyes. "Did you sort out your wardrobe issue for Friday night?" "Oh, the green dress?" I replied smoothly, pouring myself a glass of water. "Yes, it was so strange. I must have mishandled the material or caught it on something sharp in the closet. Silly me, but it's no problem at all. I actually ordered a much better gown last night. A custom designer dress that's being rushed to my office tomorrow." Brenda's hands tightened around her coffee mug. Her knuckles turned white. I could see the anger flare up in her eyes. The whole point of her destroying my dress was to ruin my moment, to make me feel small and unlovely for our anniversary. Seeing me completely unaffected and upgrading to something even better was like a slap to her face. "A designer gown?" she asked, her voice tight. "Julian is paying for that." "Oh no," I chuckled softly. "I paid for it myself. My firm just closed a massive commercial contract, and my bonus came through early. In fact, I invited your boss, Mr. Sterling, to our anniversary dinner on Friday. Did I tell you? He's a key client for our new architectural project." That was the line that hooked her. Mr. Sterling was the founder and CEO of Sterling PR, Brenda's boss, and the man who would be deciding who received the VP promotion next month. Brenda nearly spilled her coffee. "You invited Arthur Sterling to your anniversary party." "Of course," I said with a light, breezy laugh. "Julian and I wanted to make it an intimate, high-profile gathering at Le Petit Chataux. We reserved the private dining room. Just family, a few high-value business associates, and Mr. Sterling. I know how much you respect him, Brenda, so I made sure he was placed right at our table." Brenda sat frozen. I could practically see the gears turning in her mind. Her toxic mix of jealousy and ambition was kicking into overdrive. She couldn't stand the thought of me hosting her boss. She couldn't stand the thought of me shining in front of the man who held her career in his hands. "That's nice," Brenda stammered, trying to regain her composure. "I hope you don't embarrass Julian in front of someone so important." "Don't worry about me, Brenda," I smiled, stepping closer and placing a gentle, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Everything is going to be unforgettable." Over the next 48 hours, I laid the groundwork. I didn't whisper a word of complaint to Julian. In fact, I went out of my way to be extraordinarily sweet to Brenda. I complimented her outfits, asked about her work, and offered to help her prepare for her upcoming promotion interview. The more generous I became, the more paranoid Brenda grew. Greedy, envious people cannot understand genuine kindness. When you treat them well after they've wronged you, they don't feel guilt, they feel suspicion. They assume you are hiding something, or they double down on their hatred because your composure makes them feel inferior. On Thursday evening, the night before the anniversary dinner, I accidentally left my laptop open on the dining room table while I went upstairs to take a shower. On the screen was a document titled, anniversary speech, and special acknowledgments. I knew Brenda wouldn't be able to resist. She was an absolute snooper. Whenever she was alone in our house, she checked mail, opened drawers, and snooped through private documents. Sure enough, when I came downstairs 10 minutes later, quietly wearing my socks on the carpeted steps, I saw Brenda standing over my laptop. She was frantically taking photos of the screen with her phone. What was on that document? It was a draft of a speech I had written. In that fake draft, I wrote a heartwarming, glowing tribute to Brenda, thanking her for being like a real sister to me. I included lines about how Brenda had mentored me, how selfless she was, and how she had personally helped curate the entire anniversary event to make sure her boss, Mr. Sterling, was impressed. I had deliberately crafted the speech to make Brenda look like the primary organizer of the event, a sweet, selfless sister who loved her family above all else. Why would I do that? Because I knew Brenda's ego. I knew that if she thought I was going to take credit for hosting Mr. Sterling, her envy would drive her crazy. But if she saw that I was handing her a golden opportunity to look amazing in front of her boss, her pride would blind her. She would accept the praise, take credit for things she didn't do, and walk right into the spotlight. And when you stand under the brightest spotlight, everyone notices when the mask finally slips. The poisoned gift. Friday arrived. The air was crisp, and the sky turned a deep, dusty pink as evening approached. The venue, Le Petit Chataux, was one of the most exclusive private dining restaurants in the city. The private dining room was elegant, featuring crystal chandeliers, a long oak table set with pristine white linens, and heavy velvet curtains overlooking a courtyard garden. Julian was wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. He looked at me as I adjusted his tie in the lobby, his eyes filled with warmth. "You look breathtaking, Maya," he whispered, kissing my cheek. "I don't know how you pulled all this together so quickly, and inviting Sterling, my boss was thrilled when he heard." "I just wanted tonight to be special, Julian," I said softly, patting his jacket. "For both of us, and for your family." "I know things have been tense with Brenda," Julian said, looking down nervously. "Thank you for being gracious. She really cares about this VP position." "Don't worry, Julian," I replied with a reassuring smile. "Brenda is going to get exactly what she deserves tonight." At 7:00 p.m., the guests arrived. Arthur Sterling entered first, a distinguished man in his late 50s with sharp gray hair, impeccably dressed, carrying an air of quiet authority. Alongside him were two senior partners from Julian's firm, Evelyn, and finally, Brenda. Brenda looked stunning, but her attire was completely over the top. She was wearing a dramatic, floor-length crimson red gown with a plunging neckline, an outfit designed to steal every bit of attention in the room. It was clearly meant to outshine me on my own anniversary. When she saw me standing in the center of the room, her eyes widened slightly. I wasn't wearing an expensive designer gown. I was wearing a classic, elegant black cocktail dress, simple, sophisticated, and understated. I looked effortless, while Brenda looked like she was trying desperately hard to be the center of the universe. "Mr. Sterling, what an honor," I said, extending my hand warmly to her boss. "Thank you so much for joining us tonight." "The pleasure is mine, Maya," Sterling replied, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. "Julian speaks about your architectural work all the time, and of course, Brenda here is one of our rising stars." Brenda immediately stepped forward, placing a hand on Sterling's arm with an overly familiar laugh. "Oh, Arthur, you're too kind. I told Maya that our family always puts excellence first. I personally made sure the arrangements for tonight were top tier. I know how high your standards are." I didn't object, I didn't interrupt, I just smiled sweetly. Yes, Brenda was very involved in the preparations. We all took our seats around the long table. Julian sat at the head, with me on his right and Mr. Sterling on his left. Brenda sat directly across from Mr. Sterling, making sure she had his undivided attention throughout the night. As the first 3 courses were served, Brenda dominated the conversation. She bragged about her projects, dropped high-profile names, and repeatedly made subtle jabs at me. "Oh, Maya's work is so cute. Brenda laughed lightheartedly over a glass of vintage wine, addressing the table. She draws blueprints for small residential buildings. It's great for keeping her busy while Julian handles the heavy financial lifting. Julian cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Brenda, Maya's firm actually handles multi-million-dollar commercial complexes. Oh, of course, darling, Brenda interrupted with a wave of her diamond-ringed hand. We're all so proud of her little achievements. I saw Mr. Sterling eyebrow raise slightly. A man of his stature and culture did not appreciate unprovoked arrogance, but he remained polite, taking a sip of his wine. Then, the moment arrived. The waiters cleared the main plates, and the room grew quiet in anticipation of the champagne toast. Julian stood up first, raising his glass. He gave a heartfelt speech about our 5 years of marriage, praising my patience, my strength, and my unwavering support. It was sweet, honest, and genuine. When Julian sat down, I stood up. Thank you, everyone, I began, my voice clear and confident, echoing softly against the dark velvet walls. 5 years of marriage is a beautiful milestone, but built behind every strong marriage is the support or the tests of the family surrounding you. Brenda sat up straighter, a triumphant smile blooming on her lips. She was waiting for the speech she had snooped on my laptop, the one where I publicly praised her and handed her all the credit in front of her boss. Tonight, I continued, holding my champagne glass high, I want to take a moment to present a very special, personal gift to my sister-in-law, Brenda. Brenda smiled brightly, leaning back in her chair with complete satisfaction. Oh, Maya, you really didn't have to, she called out loudly, making sure Sterling was looking at her. Family is its own reward. No, Brenda, I said, looking her straight in the eyes with a warm, unwavering gaze. I insist. You've given me so much over the last 5 years. It's time I gave something back to you. I motioned to the restaurant's head waiter, who was standing near the entrance. The waiter stepped forward, holding a large, beautifully wrapped gift box tied with a thick, silver satin bow. The room fell quiet. Everyone looked at the box. Brenda's smile faltered slightly, a tiny crack in her confident facade. She hadn't seen a box like this mentioned in the laptop document. Go ahead, Brenda, I said softly. Open it in front of everyone. Show Mr. Sterling and our guests how much our family bond truly means. The unmasking. Brenda stared at the box sitting on the white tablecloth in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the silver satin ribbon. What is this, Maya? She asked, her voice losing its loud confidence, a subtle edge of nervousness creeping in. Just a reminder of your creativity, Brenda, I replied smoothly, taking my seat next to Julian. Please open it, share it with the table. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, intrigued. Well, go on, Brenda, don't keep us in suspense. With everyone's eyes locked onto her, Brenda had no choice. She reached out and pulled the silver ribbon. The silk bow unraveled, falling to the table. She lifted the heavy lid of the black box. Inside lay a carefully folded piece of fabric. Brenda reached in, her painted nails clutching the material, and pulled it out of the box, holding it up so the room could see. A collective gasp went around the dining table. It was the shredded remains of my emerald green silk dress. The cut strips of fabric hung down like ragged banners. The severed bodice, the destroyed embroidery, the cleanly sliced waistline, all of it was exposed under the bright light of the chandelier. And tucked neatly inside the cut collar of the dress, resting right in Brenda's hand, was a small, transparent acrylic frame holding a photograph. It was a high-resolution, crystal-clear photo, taken from the security camera I had installed in the upper hallway of our house 3 months ago, a camera Brenda didn't know existed. The photo clearly showed Brenda standing inside my guest bedroom, holding my grandmother's heavy fabric shears, mid-slice through the silk gown, with a look of pure, malicious pleasure on her face. Below the photograph, printed in clean, crisp lettering, was the timestamp, Wednesday, 3:14 p.m. The silence in the private dining room was deafening. You could hear the slow, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Brenda sat frozen, her face instantly draining of all color. The bright crimson of her dress now contrasted sickeningly with her ghostly pale skin. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. What is this?" Evelyn gasped, standing up from her chair, her hands trembling as she looked at the shredded dress hanging from her daughter's hands. "Maya, what is the meaning of this prank?" "It's not a prank, Evelyn," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of my water. "That was the dress I was supposed to wear tonight to celebrate my 5th anniversary with your son. Brenda felt that it didn't suit my figure, so 2 days ago she took my grandmother's shears and sliced it into pieces." Julian looked at the shredded fabric, then at the photographic evidence in the frame, and finally at his sister. His face turned from confusion to absolute shock, and then to a deep, dark red of sheer rage. "Brenda," Julian's voice was low, dangerous, and trembling with disbelief. "Tell me you didn't do this. Tell me this is a mistake." Brenda looked like a cornered animal. She looked wildly around the table. She looked at Julian, at her mother, and then her eyes landed on Arthur Sterling. Mr. Sterling was staring at the photo in the frame, his face completely rigid. As the head of a major public relations firm, his entire career was built on evaluating human character, brand safety, and integrity. Seeing one of his senior candidates for vice president caught red-handed in an act of malicious, envious destruction against her own family was something no corporate spin could ever fix. "Arthur, Mr. Sterling," Brenda panicked, dropping the shredded silk as if it had burned her hands. She reached across the table toward her boss, her voice high-pitched and hysterical. "This isn't what it looks like. Maya set me up. She's jealous of my career. She manufactured this. It's a Photoshop. She hates me." "A Photoshop, Brenda?" I asked, my voice cool and collected. "The security footage is saved on a secure cloud server, complete with audio. Would you like me to play the audio recording where you told me, and I quote, 'Who is Julian going to believe, me or you?'" Brenda collapsed back into her chair, her shoulders sinking. The lie was dead. The cover-up was impossible. "Why, Brenda?" Julian slammed his palm on the table, making the wine glasses ring. "Why would you do something so spiteful to my wife, on our anniversary?" "Because she doesn't belong here," Brenda suddenly screamed, completely losing her composure. The polished PR executive vanished, replaced by the bitter, envious woman she had hidden for 5 years. "She took you away from us, Julian. She thinks she's so perfect with her little career and her little house. She doesn't deserve any of this. You were supposed to take care of me and Mom, not her." Evelyn covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face, finally seeing the monster she had raised and enabled for 30 years. Mr. Sterling slowly stood up from the table. He buttoned his suit jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and looked down at Brenda with an expression of profound disgust. "Brenda," Sterling said, his voice cold as ice. "At Sterling PR, we manage reputation. But more importantly, we require basic integrity from our leadership. A person who is capable of such petty, cruel, and destructive behavior toward her own family is a liability to my firm, my clients, and my team." "Arthur, please," Brenda begged, tears ruining her heavy makeup. "It was just a family dispute. It has nothing to do with my work." "It has everything to do with who you are," Sterling replied firmly. "Do not bother coming into the office on Monday morning. My HR director will contact you regarding your severance package. Your candidacy for vice president is revoked, effective immediately." Sterling turned to Julian and me, bowing his head slightly. "Julian, Maya, I deeply apologize for this disturbance on your special night. Maya, your dignity tonight was extraordinary. I wish you both a very happy anniversary." With that, Arthur Sterling turned and walked out of the private dining room, leaving a trail of absolute devastation in his wake. The fall of the crown. The air in the room was suffocating. Brenda sat staring at the closed double doors through which her boss and her entire career had just walked away forever. "My job," Brenda whispered, her hands shaking violently. "My promotion, you ruined my life." She whipped her head toward me, her eyes filled with pure venom. She lunged across the table, knocking over a glass of red wine that spilled across the pristine white tablecloth. "You ruined my life, "You jealous little bitch." Before she could reach me, Julian stepped in front of her. He grabbed Brenda by her arms, holding her back with a strength I had never seen him use before. "Don't you touch her," Julian roared, his voice echoing through the restaurant. "Don't you ever step near my wife again." "Julian, please," Evelyn cried, grabbing Julian's arm. "She's your sister. She made a mistake. Tell Mr. Sterling it was a misunderstanding. You have to save her career." Julian looked at his mother, his eyes filled with a painful, heartbreaking realization. For 5 years, he had asked me to be the bigger person. For 5 years, he had defended his family at the expense of my feelings. But seeing the absolute malice in Brenda's actions and his mother's endless excuses for her finally broke the spell. "No, Mom," Julian said, his voice dropping into a firm, unyielding tone. "She didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. And so did you by constantly enabling her." Julian released Brenda, letting her fall back into her chair in a weeping heap. He turned to his mother. "I'm done. I'm done paying for Brenda's credit card bills. I'm done letting you guilt me into supporting her luxury lifestyle. From this moment on, Brenda is on her own. And if you choose to justify her actions, Mom, then you can stay with her." "Julian, no." Evelyn wept, realizing that in trying to protect her daughter's entitlement, she had lost her son. Julian walked back to my side, took my hand in his, and squeezed it tightly. I looked up at him, seeing a man who had finally freed himself from the invisible chains of emotional abuse. "Let's go home, Maya," Julian said softly. I picked up my purse, looked at Brenda one last time, and spoke in a voice that was quiet, yet carried across the silent room. "You tried to destroy my dress because you thought it represented my strength," I said gently. "But the dress was just fabric, Brenda. My strength was never in the silk. It was in knowing who I am and knowing that no matter how much dirt you throw, light always finds a way in." We turned around and walked out of Le Petit Chétox, leaving Brenda sobbing amidst the ruined silk and spilled wine. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and absolute. Brenda was officially terminated from Sterling PR. Without her high-paying job and without Julian's financial backing, she was forced to give up her luxury high-rise apartment in the city. She had to move back into her mother's small suburban home, taking a low-level entry job at a local firm where nobody cared about her former status. Her social media, once filled with fake luxury and arrogant posts, went completely dark. Julian and I went to counseling together. It wasn't easy, but taking off the mask of keeping the peace allowed us to build a foundation of absolute honesty. He learned to set healthy boundaries, and for the first time in our marriage, our home felt like a true sanctuary free from toxic intrusion. A month later, I took the shredded pieces of the emerald green dress to my tailor. I didn't ask her to throw them away. Instead, I asked her to take the finest pieces of the remaining silk and sew them into a small, elegant green scarf. Now, whenever I wear that scarf, I don't feel sadness. I don't feel anger. I feel a profound sense of triumph. It serves as a gentle, permanent reminder that you should never let cruel people force you into being small. You don't have to scream to win a battle, and you don't have to sink to their level to find justice. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to stand in the truth, let the mask fall, and allow people to reap exactly what they have sown. Conclusion and final reflection. Life has a quiet, incredible way of balancing the scales. When people operate out of malice, envy, and cruelty, they often construct the very traps that end up catching them. True strength isn't about shouting louder or striking back with equal cruelty. It's about holding your head high, maintaining your dignity, and letting the light of truth expose the darkness. Like, share, and subscribe to the Calm Girl Stories channel. Thank you so much for watching and supporting our community. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. This story is inspired by real experiences. We believe that every story carries a lesson that can bring light to others. To protect everyone's privacy, our editors may change names, locations, and certain details while keeping the heart of the story true.